I feel very nice to see you, Patrick. I feel bad about the people at the back who can't see. Should we do the whole thing standing up?
I'm really lazy, John, but...
Does anyone have any preferences? Will we just sit? Okay.
Yeah, they don't.
I just want people
they just want to hear us.
I want people to get the full Ronson.
Well, we're going to try and get the full Ronson, which sounds kind of dirty. So most people probably know John is the amazing writer of Them, Adventures of the Extremists, The Men Who Stare at Goats, Psychopath Test, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and more recently, loads of amazing podcast series like The Butterfly Effect, The Last Days of August, and most recently still, Things Fell Apart, which is a brilliant approach to the culture wars, kind of looking at it historically. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore you and ask John all the questions I'm really interested in about your career in general.
But there will also be a Q&A.
There will be a Q&A at the end, so you can go, oh, he didn't ask this obvious question, I'll ask it now. So I actually wanted to start by asking about your view on the word gonzo.
Right, yeah. The word gonzo, it sort of followed me around, that word. Gonzo, obviously, it comes from Hunter S. Thompson, and Hunter S. Thompson would take loads of LSD and then go to a police convention and cause mayhem. And I don't do that. Like, I don't take LSD and then go to a police convention. So I think gonzo implies something a bit more riotous than what I do. I'm a much more polite gonzo. What we have in common is first-person narrative, non-fiction. For me, the tradition that I feel I come from is much more the tradition of like Tom Wolfe's new journalism, people like Gay Talese and George Plimpton, and my other great inspiration was Nick Broomfield. So,
but like what I think they mean with gonzo is that you put yourself in the story when it's appropriate. Like when do you kind of feel? When did you start doing that?
I think, well, I was very inspired by Nick Broomfield.
Yeah.
I loved the idea of just this presence behind the camera. I never wanted to be like a presenter. I never wanted to be like on TV. But this presence, like just to the side of the camera, just this sort of slightly odd voice, maybe, poking at the absurdities and pricking the hypocrisies and so on. So, but always in a gentle way, I'd say.
No LSD.
As opposed to overwhelming. I didn't want to make it all about me, but I do like it. So, but it always felt like, it just started to happen appropriately. So the very first story I did, I suppose, was a year with Omar Bakri Mohammed, the militant Islamist who said he wouldn't rest until he saw the flag of Islam flying over Downing Street. And a couple of months into me following him around, he said, I have allowed you into my life. I have given you much. I would like something in return. And I said, what? And he said, will you drive me to Office World? So I became his I became his chauffeur while I was driving him to like secret terrorist meetings, and then so there was obviously that was funny and risky, it was like kind of uncomfortable. So I really like, and because he asked me to become his chauffeur, it was then completely legitimate for the rest of the story. You just sort of see me driving him around. He goes to Office World because of his special price promise that if you find a photocopying service that's cheaper, he'll give you double the money back. And then he outed me as a Jew at his jihad training camp in Crawley, near Gatwick. He said, look at me with the infidel... I'd never told him I was Jewish. He said, look at me with the infidel John, who is a Jew. And they all went, oh! And I said, surely it's better to be a Jew than an atheist. And I heard someone in the crowd go, no, it isn't. I've got to say, by the way, the weirdest thing about that story is that I am an atheist. Why would I, the only time in my life I ever sort of, exerted my Jewishness was a jihad training camp. Idiocy.
Can I talk a bit about them? I was rereading, so that's your first book.
Well, the first proper book. Yeah. I wrote a book before it called Clubbed Class, which really I've discounted as a book. Them was nominated for the for the Guardian's first book award. It was shortlisted. And then just before the award ceremony, I got a phone call from the award organisers. This is like back in 2000, saying, "Is it true that you've written a book already?" And I said, "Well, it's book-shaped." Anyway, I still got disqualified.
Actually, why did you become a writer, broadcaster? What did you want to be when you were younger? Because I read Frank, obviously, as well, which is your adventures with Frank Sidebottom as a teenage,
right, which was then directed into a film starring and directed by another guest at Boris House, Lenny Abrahamson. Yeah.
Did you want to be a musician? Like, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
I just wanted to. Well, I think my prime ambition as a child was to get out of Cardiff, and well, things weren't going well, and just somehow get to London.
Yeah.
So I got to London. I think I didn't want to be a writer. I always remember the manager of Frank Sidebottom's band. The way I got to join Frank Sidebottom's band was I was the social secretary at the Polytechnic of Central London, and I got a phone call, this panicked phone call saying, "Frank's supposed to be playing, but our keyboard player's got terrible medical issues, and so we're going to have to cancel unless you know any keyboard players." And I said, "I know keyboard. I play keyboards." And he said, "Can you play C, F, and G?" He said, "Well, you're in." Luckily, those are the only three chords. So anyway, the manager said, "You're not cut out for being a musician." He said, "You're going to end up being some kind of writer."
And Frank is like someone you might have written about years later, right? He wrote Chris Sivey wore this big polystyrene head,
big fake head that he never took off in public, but sometimes in private. Nothing makes a 19-year-old boy feel more alive than driving up the M6 at 3:00 in the morning next to a man wearing a big fake head. And it was so through the looking glass. After all of those years in Cardiff, suddenly finding yourself through the looking glass.
So did you...
Yeah, so he said, you're going to end up being some kind of writer.
Yeah.
And all I knew about writing was, reading Kurt Vonnegut, who was saying, writing's like the worst. You're just going to spend your whole life alone, chain smoking. And I thought, I don't fancy that. But that is how my life turned out. I did spend it all alone, chain smoking, and it was fine.
And was broadcasting always going hand in hand? So you did the Ronson mission in the 90s. Was that kind of coinciding with writing them, or?
I wrote. Okay, so what happened was after I got fired from Frank Sidebottom's band for tax reasons. He owed £30,000 tax and couldn't pay, so he fired the band and went solo. So then I was marooned in Manchester. And I started doing a radio show, late night radio show, and then we all got fired. The programme controller rubbed my back in commiseration while firing me. And I left and thought, never again am I going to allow one person to control my life to that extent. Because he just took, a business decision, just took everything I loved away from me. And I think that's the answer. It's I'm never going to let that happen to me again. I'm never going to let somebody have total power over me. So I started writing and doing radio shows and TV shows, and it was for that reason. It's if someone goes off me, it'll be all right because there's someone else who'll like me.
So with them, I was rereading them, which is amazing to reread after 20 years because it's still excellent. But also, your most recent podcast, Things Fell Apart, the roots of it are all in this, written in the late 90s, early 90s?
Yeah, I think I started writing them in 96. And it's true, it's quite, something very specific.
So this is about extremists and conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, so what happened was, I spent time with Omar Bakri, and then about a year later, I made a documentary for Channel 4 about a politically correct faction of the Ku Klux Klan that had banned the robes and the hoods and the cross burnings, banned all the things that were presumably the most fun about being in the Ku Klux Klan. And
just kept the racism.
Yeah, kept the racism. And then, but what he did was he erected in his garden a marquee, much like this one. And all the Klansmen had to sit there filling out a multiple choice questionnaire about which strengths and weaknesses most applied to them. And I always remember that one of them was mixes easily, which... usually would be a strength, right? But with the Klan, it's a weakness. So I said that to them, but he said, well, we mean mixing within our own group. Anyway, I noticed a connection between these two groups. And this was a very early, I don't think to blow my own trumpet, I don't think people had noticed this connection until then, which was they had something in common. Omar Bakri's group in London and the Clan in Arkansas had one thing in common, which is that they were conspiracy theorists. They both believed that there was a shadowy cabal secretly ruling the world from inside a secret room. And I thought that was interesting, that these two disparate groups had this thing in common. And I thought, maybe there's a relationship between political extremism and conspiracy theory, which now everybody knows, but at the time in mid-90s was a kind of was a thought that people weren't having. So that was my motivation to write them, because then I thought, well, how can I write a book about that? And I thought, I know how they all believe that there's a secret room inside which a shadowy cabal is secretly ruling the world. I'll hook up with some conspiracy theorists and we'll travel the world trying to find the secret room. And when we find it, we'll get in somehow and confront them going about their covert wickedness. So that's the book. That's the adventure in the book. I get chased away from powerful places and I'm hanging out with conspiracy theorists who at the time were very nascent, but then grew into huge ideological powerhouses.
I'm really curious how, like, if you've reread it in recent years or looked at bits of it in recent years, and how you think it would be different now, because at that time, there, like, kind of liberal social democracy was ascendant all over the world. Everyone thought everything was heading in a certain direction.
Yeah, the end of history.
And conspiracy theorists were on the fringes, whereas now,
no, they won.
Now they kind of have one. Like everything, there's no real mainstream anymore. There's just all these niches, and there's no counterculture or culture. Everything is. People can find these groups online so easily.
It came as such a shock. I was at the gym, and so in them, I spent quite a lot of time with a very nascent conspiracy theorist called Alex Jones, who really no one had heard of. He was 26 years old. Then I, you cut to like 25 years later, cut to 2015, 2016. I'm at the gym in New York, and Trump is on like all of the, They would film the podium from which Trump would soon speak over the podium from which Hillary Clinton was actually speaking. That's how craven it was. And anyway, so I put on my headphones, and it was a Trump Q&A, and somebody said, "Are you going back on the Alex Jones show?" And he went, "Alex Jones, nice guy." And I almost fell off the elliptical. Like, I tell you, like, of all the people I've interviewed, if you'd said to them, which one would you like to have the ear of the president? I wouldn't say Alex Jones. Yeah, it was incredible. It almost feels, this is an overblown metaphor, but I remember years ago someone saying to me about Omar Bakri, maybe this is, everybody would love to see the documentary following Hitler the watercolorist. Okay. It's maybe them as, Hitler is me following Hitler the watercolorist.
Do you feel if you were to do something like this now, it would have to be done in a completely different way?
After 9/11, I certainly felt I couldn't write them now because it had become so much. The conspiracy theorists got so mean, like so horrible after 9/11. I had this friend called Rachel North who was blown up in one of the trains on July 7th, 2005. And she survived, and she became like a spokesperson for the survivors. And she was Googling herself one day, and there were all these conspiracy theorists saying that she didn't exist, and she was a team of MI5 agents spreading disinformation. So she she did what you would do, right? You say, okay, I'll explain, it'll be fine. So she said, actually, I do exist, and it's not nice to be told that you don't exist when you've just been blown up on the tube. And the more she tried to convince them that she existed, the more they were convinced that she didn't. And then finally she confronted them in person, and they just said that she was mentally ill. So when I heard that story, I thought, well, the light of humour has gone out in the world of the relationship between conspiracy theorists and the objects of their scorn.
Actually, how do you think your work has changed over years? What do you see as the through line through it? Because I'm going to throw my theory on you. Like the through line I see is that you're often talking to people who have a very morally simplistic view of the world, and you tend to come in with a lot of empathy and a more ethical framework that is more complicated, and you bang it up against these very simplistic moral outlooks. Would that?
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but I think that's true. And I think the way it's progressed over the years is that both them and The Men Who Stare at Goats are books that exist very much on the fringes of society, conspiracy theorists in the shadows, and the Menisteric Goats was secret military units trying to kill goats just by staring at them.
They believed they thought all these paranormal things could possibly be turned into weapons.
Yeah. I uncovered this, me and my producer, Jon Sargent, uncovered this secret military group called Project Jedi. And I met one of them in Hawaii in 2003. And I said, so what was Project Jedi? He said it was a series of levels. And I said, what was level 1? He said, level 1 was observation. You walk into a room, how many chairs are in the room? The super soldier would just know. So I said... What?
Great for event organising.
Yeah. I said, what was level 2? He said, level 2 was intuition. A fork in the road. Do you go left? Do you go right? You go right. And I said, what was level 3? He said, level 3 was invisibility. I said, that's quite a leap from level 2. I said, what, actual invisibility? And he said, at first, but after a while, we adapted it to finding ways of not being seen. I love the fact that he made that sound like a good progression. I said, like camouflage? He went, no. And level 4 was we had a master sergeant that could stop the heart of a goat just by wanting it to stop. And I said, did he ever manage it? And he said, one time, but his heart
just
got
sounds like
damaged.
It was a sick goat.
Well, let me get on to that. He said his heart got damaged in the process. And I said, what, was the goat psychically fighting back? And he said the goat didn't stand a chance. But yeah, it turns out that these goats was part of this unit at Fort Bragg called Goat Lab, where they'd shoot the goats and then nurse the goats back to health to teach them how to, nurse people back to health in the battlefield. So my guess is if a goat did fall over while being stared at, it was probably as a result of a pre-existing condition or just boredom, just Anyway, so my point is those things took place very much on the fringes of society. But maybe a little bit closer. Maybe the Menisteric Goats was a little bit closer to the mainstream than them. By the time I wrote the psychopath test, and then So You've Been Publicly Shamed, the irrational beliefs, the people who behave with disproportionate power, and so on, became us on social media. So it very much became my work, I think, got very much more towards us, our world. I remember when I was writing So You've Been Publicly Shamed, thinking, God, all of these years I've been writing about abuses of power, but usually it's, big pharma or the military or, psychiatric industry or whatever. This is the first time when I'm covering an abuse of power where the people abusing their power was us.
So the other thing I think has changed, actually, ages ago we did an interview for the Irish Times, and you were talking about how when there's a story in Lost at Sea, which is a collection of your big magazine pieces about the credit card industry and people taking advantage of, big companies taking advantage of people who don't know anything about finance, basically. And you were saying that you thought that you kind of think you should have written something about the financial crisis, but that the people were too boring.
Yeah.
Like the most powerful, possibly evil people in the world were too boring.
Yeah, it made me realise that if you want to get away with wielding true malevolent power, be boring. Because journalists don't want to write it, because we want to look good. It was a terrible lesson. So I spent 6 months trying to write a book about, I was thinking in my head it was like the men who stare at goats of the credit card industry. And my American publisher never ceases to remind me that if I'd written the book, it would have come out just before the financial crash of 2008. But I didn't write it. And for that reason, I wasn't at the time mature enough to make these characters like pen pushers light up the page. I didn't know how to do it.
Do you think you could do it now? Because one of the other things I've noticed in your work, particularly from kind of You've Been Publicly Shamed on to the more recent the most recent podcasts, you're looking at systemic things more. So the earlier stuff, you're looking at really colourful personalities, and then you're learning stuff from what that means in the culture. But later on, you seem to be you're finding ways to write about, in a way, more boring people in some ways.
Yeah,
but by looking at the systemic connections between them.
Yeah, I think that's true. as a younger person, I wasn't really aware of systemic things quite so much. My mind just went to sort of situational things. And I learned, and it was partly as a result of, hearing feedback about some of my books. Why don't you look more at systemic issues? I got that feedback with "So You've Been Publicly Shamed." A couple of people said it should have looked more at systemic problems. And unlike grumpier middle-aged writers who don't want to hear anything from younger people, I actually thought that was a very good piece of advice.
What were the systemic things they think? Because I think You've Been Publicly Shamed is a really prescient book. Like, it's kind of, about 5 years later, people started talking about cancel culture, which I don't really think exists. I think your analysis is way more accurate. I think people mob up and they get into a shame spiral, kind of in the way you described in that book.
Yeah.
So what were the things people pointed out? Not that you want to get you to criticize your own books.
Right. Well, that criticism would have gone away if I'd done one thing.
Yeah.
So the most famous chapter of that book, which really felt like when the New York Times published this extract from the book, never have I felt more like a hand grenade being thrown into the world. And it was a story of this woman called Justine Sacco, who was like the kind of typhoid Mary of public shaming, like the very first, like ground zero. And her shaming was she was getting on a plane, going to Cape Town, and she tweeted just before getting on the plane, she thought of what she thought was a funny joke mocking her own privilege. But because she only had 120 Twitter followers and no one had any context, it didn't come over that way. It was going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white. And so while she was asleep on the plane and completely oblivious, Twitter, for the first time ever, took control of her life and dismantled it. By the time she landed 11 hours later, oblivious, had no chance to imagine being on trial, very Kafkaesque. Imagine being like arrested, put on trial and convicted and sentenced, and all the time you're asleep on a plane and you've got no idea. And that was hilarious to people. A hashtag was trending worldwide. Hashtag has Justine landed yet? Her obliviousness to her punishment was the reason why it went so crazily viral, because everybody thought this is great. We're about to watch this Justine Sacco bitch get fired in real time before she even knows she's being fired. People were like in bars. It was like the Truman Show. Like, I'm dying to go home to bed, but I need to wait for Justine Sacco's plane to land so everybody could jump out. I mean, God, we became barbaric that night. I mean, at the beginning of the night, I was like everybody else was that night. When I tweet came up, I thought, wow, somebody's fucked. And I but by the end of the night, my God, I wanted to write that book. So anyway, what was interesting, and this is the answer to the question, Justine Sacco was a fashionable bullying victim. She was like someone who everybody could get behind. Trolls, misogynists, social justice people, Trump, like everyone piled in on Justine Sacco that night. She was usually Googled 40 times a month, and that night she was Googled 1,220,000 times. Yeah. I think some people got annoyed with me. You see, I felt, because the Justine Sacco shaming was so diverse, it was from so many different disparate groups, I didn't really need to... Well, to answer your question, I wish I'd written one more chapter in that book where I went around and I met some of the main... Even just somebody who fired off a tweet to her, I hope Justine Sacco gets AIDS, lol. Or, that person. Or the person who turned up at Cape Town Airport with a camera to photograph her as she got off the plane. I'd just done a series of portraits about what was happening in their lives. And I think through that could have come some systemic, a look at, well, you shamed this person because this was happening in your life. And that could have been more of a sort of nuanced look at the systemicness of it all.
Because I think that book gets it really right about what's happening on social media in a way people get wrong now. So I think now there's a cancel culture narrative, and depending who you are, that narrative is different. So people go, it's like, oh, it's young people have no sense of humor, or they go, it's the left, or they go, it's the right.
Yeah.
Whereas what You've Been Publicly Shamed does really well is it just shows the actual dynamics of what a Twitter shaming looks like, which doesn't really have anything to do with politics in a way. It's to do with human nature.
But the phrase cancel culture has come along. It's the worst phrase in the world because it defines wildly different sets of circumstances. Everything from, J.K. Rowling through to Justine Sacco through to, Putin cited cancel culture as part of his reason, for invading Ukraine. So it's become a meaningless, pathetic, ridiculous phrase, which is very self-serving too. That's my view.
Every now and again, I've seen you since that book, somebody will come along and go, John, what do you think of this? Is this totally wrong? And I see you go, well, it's not totally wrong. That person did bad things.
Yeah, my friend John Safran, the Australian journalist, says I've become a shaming imam, that every time someone gets shamed now, I'm called upon. And it's difficult. Yeah, it was frustrating for somebody who believes in clarity, like I do, that there was so little clarity around my book from people who hadn't read it, because they were reading people who'd read, and so on. Clearly what I was talking about was the disproportionate punishment of private individuals who really hadn't done anything much wrong. I wasn't talking about politicians who commit sexual assault. So it's weird, to be kind of bought into those sorts of things.
In recent years, you've got really involved in making really good researched podcasts rather than books. Is that accurate? And why is the podcast? Could you talk a little bit about why you became so interested in podcasts?
Well, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I listen to them all the time. And I think experience the world in auditory ways. I like listening to things more than watching things and reading things. So I was kind of drawn to it for that reason. And it's like the Wild West of narrative nonfiction. As long as it's a page turner, you can do anything. But I think the real reason is that I care about books so much and would hate to be in a situation like this and have just published a book which I don't think is very good. To me, that's like the worst nightmare in the world. So when I come up with ideas that I think are really good, but maybe not quite book level good, I'll do it as a podcast. So that's what I did with The Butterfly Effect and The Last Days of August. And it was the BBC who suggested Things Fell Apart to me. So that couldn't have been a book anyway because it was their idea.
And both those books, Butterfly Effect is about the financial changes in the porn industry and how that spills out.
Oh my God, it was such a wild... I loved The Butterfly Effect. I actually wish that one had been a book because it's such a great story.
So do you actually, at the start of a project, just to roll back slightly, you go, okay, this is going to be a podcast, not a book, because you don't think it is book-worthy, but The Butterfly Effect definitely could have.
Yeah, to be completely honest, one of my publishers in another country said that he didn't want me to write a book that touched on the porn industry. So when I said I've got this really amazing story that I found, he was like, I don't want you to write a book about that. So, and at the same time, Audible was saying to me I could do anything. So it just seemed like a no-brainer. I just did it for Audible. The story was that... I suppose my big moment of my Damascus moment was on the set of Stepdaughter Cheerleader Orgy, where the director just said to me, in the 90s when I started out in porn, the films weren't called Stepdaughter Cheerleader Orgy. And I said, what were they called? He said, the first film I directed was called The Billionaire's Blonde. And the second one was called Women of Influence. So I said, so what changed? And he said, search engine optimization. You need to put as many of the most searchable terms in your titles as possible. This is like a ripple effect of Pornhub. So I said, so are there people who, are there people in the porn industry who aren't easily searchable, who fall through the net? Yeah. And he said, yes. If you're a 23-year-old woman in porn now, you can't get work because you're too old to be a teen and you're too young to be a MILF. You're just stuck in these fallow years between teen and MILF. So I was like, so what do they do while they wait to become a MILF? And it turns out that many of them do this thing called customs. So and it's like therapy, it's like porn therapy. If you've got a porn film that you've waited your whole life to see, but it's so odd, nobody would ever think to make it. You can now commission a bunch of very professional but very employed porn people to make the porn film just for you. So my favourite one was Stamps Man. This was a guy, a Norwegian, a mysterious Norwegian, who had 10 books of very expensive stamps, and he commissioned 10 custom porn films, and in each of them, he sent his book of very expensive stamps to a team of porn people who would destroy his stamp collection, and that was his porn film. I got obsessed with Stamps Man, and I remember I met this porn star, and I said to her, have you ever been commissioned to destroy somebody's book of stamps? And she said, are you Stamps Man? So what a great...
And on that bombshell.
So what a lovely... So it becomes a story about like plucky porn people fighting the evil tech bros. Is what the story's about?
So like it's another example of you coming into something that has a very simplistic moral narrative and making it less simplistic. Yeah. But you mentioned there that you happened to be on the set of Cheerleader Audrey.
Stepdaughter Cheerleader Audrey. The reason I remember that was because he had a dialogue scene and all the guys were like standing at the top of the road and all the stepdaughters were coming up the road towards them from presumably cheerleading practice. And the guys were all going, oh, I like the look of your daughter. And Mike behind the camera was going, stepdaughter.
Okay, so my question is about how you find stuff. So you're obviously out researching stuff. So you didn't have the butterfly effect in your head when you were on set for that. So was that for an article or like how do you find your stories?
Okay, well that one, actually the genesis moment was when I was writing So You've Been Publicly Shamed. Yeah. I met somebody. I'd mentioned I was much more open with what I was doing at the time. So I was on Twitter saying I'm writing a book about public shaming or about shame. And this guy called Conor Habib messaged me, who lives in Dublin.
And there's a novel coming out.
Yeah, brilliant guy. But used to be a male porn star. And he said, he was living in California at the time. He said he was a big fan of mine, and if I wanted to know more about his work, I should Google him. So I Googled him and just saw loads of close-up photographs of his anus. And then he said there's all these people who are doing really interesting things with sexual shame. So, you know, they're like acting out their most shameful scenarios in a porn film as a means of, you know, what's the word? You know,
catharsis?
Yeah, catharsis or control or whatever. And so I met one of them, this woman called Princess Donna, in a hotel lobby. I was in my room. This was the moment that made me want to make the butterfly effect. The phone rings and this receptionist says, your guest is waiting for you downstairs. So I went downstairs. This was the Chateau Marmont, where everybody was like dressed like me in like, you know, slouchy, you know, shapeless clothes. Except for Princess Donna, who looked like a kind of great mad peacock, you know, bright, very tight dress. She looked like a sex worker. And as I was walking towards her, she was dressed that way, and as I was walking towards her, I glanced over at the receptionist, and he was looking at her, not knowing that anyone was looking at him. And the look on his face was total contempt. And I thought, I bet you're fine with porn stars when they're on your laptop, but you don't want them in your vicinity. And it was that hypocrisy that made me interested in the porn world. And what I discovered very much straight away was that the thing that porn stars are most angry about is Fabian Tillman, who's the man who gave the world Pornhub. So then I thought, okay, well, that's my butterfly effect story. Fabian comes up with this idea to give the world free porn, readily available free porn. What are the ripples of that idea? And the ripples are seismic. I mean, he's changed human sexuality.
So the thing, like, I'm struck by actually really in those podcasts is like you have a lot of empathy, and also you don't, like, you've written and spoken before about like having anxiety, and I think with anxiety comes a lack of certainty, and a lot of the people you're meeting are certain about things. Like even that guy in the lobby judging the porn star is certain about his judgment.
Yeah.
And then onto your most recent podcast, Things Fell Apart. Culture wars are about being certain. And one of the things Things Fall Apart is a really interesting approach to the culture war because you're very wary of not getting embroiled in it, but wanting to explore it.
Yeah.
And the way you did that was to look at it historically.
Yeah, and to be very balanced and nuanced. And, when you both sides things, it's quite a minefield. People don't like it. But for some wonderful reason, which I can't quite explain, I tend to get a free pass for both sides and things. People don't mind it when I do it. And I don't want that to end, touch wood. But I think it must be because I just really think things through, and I never go into something with an agenda. Even if I clearly believe in one side and not the other, I still want to give everybody the right to present themselves as complicated, manifold humans. And as a result of that, I tend, even though my stuff is often very much the kind of stories that really piss people off, my stories don't, and I think it's for that reason.
So why did you want to write about the culture war? And actually, you write the podcast. They're written. You could almost make them books.
Oh, totally. Yeah, if you see my paper edits, they look practically like a chapter in a book. It was, to be completely frank, it was Dublin's son, Graham Linehan, that made me want to do it. I'm sure everybody knows, the great comic genius, Father Ted, the IT crowd, and then totally lost himself to a particular culture war that he fought with such an intensity and so few boundaries that other people who believed the same stuff that he did were pleading with him to please, bring this down. But he couldn't bring it down. And now he's lost everything. His reputation, his work, a musical that he was writing just got cancelled, his family, his marriage is split up. Whatever you think about the thing, it felt strange and terrible that something was happening to some people's heads that would force them into this position. Was it the algorithms? Was it our age? What was happening? And me and Graham had a terrible, terrible falling out. I mean, to this day, he tweets about me, or not tweets, he's been banned from Twitter, but substacks against me number of times a week. To this day, 3 years later, I'm a snivelling. I won't go into that. But so that was my question. What happened to turn Graham that way? And I thought maybe the answer to that question would be to go back to the as far back as I could to the pebble thrown in the pond that ended with this world of culture wars. So that was my motivation for wanting to do it.
Because it is really elucidating when you look at. There's an episode on the origin of the evangelicals in America's obsession with abortion, which you kind of track by finding this young filmmaker. There's a thing about the satanic panic in the 80s.
Yeah.
And when you look at those kind of panics now, you do go, oh, wow, loads of the culture war stuff people are getting so upset about now will resolve itself in time if we let it.
Yeah. Or
what do you think?
Well, it's like a many-headed hydra. I don't know. I always find it dispiriting if something happens and then the result of this thing immediately, gets subsumed into the culture wars. Yeah. So if you believe this, this, and this, then it means about this new thing, you're going to believe that, and vice versa. And you see that happening all the time. I mean, the most recent example of that, I would say, was the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Yeah. That immediately got subsumed into the culture wars, and it was almost like people. It was like people were being encouraged instead of. I'm a bit nervous about what I'm going to say next. I think people were told what to think about that, and I found that very dispiriting. Think for yourself. Don't be told what to think about something as important as that.
The most optimistic, kind of moving episode in Things Fall Apart is the one about Tammy Faye Baker. She was like an evangelical kind of TV star.
Yeah.
And she, back in the 80s, at the height of the AIDS crisis, she interviewed
a gay pastor with AIDS. Full-blown AIDS, Steve Peters. This was 1985. She wanted to interview somebody with AIDS. This was when, the televangelists at the time, Tammy Faye's peer group, like Jerry Falwell, were, so homophobic that they convinced President Reagan to not say the word AIDS in public, which he didn't for 4 years, between 81 and 85. And in the middle of this, Tammy Faye Baker she was feeling isolated from her peer group. And so she interviews this gay pastor with AIDS, Steve Peters. The reason I called the show a miracle for a couple of reasons. The first reason is he goes on her show and the ripples are extraordinary. It's just a connection between these two warring factions, Steve being human, Tammy being human, connecting. That night of the broadcast, which you can see on YouTube, it's Tammy interviewing Steve. It starts off very awkwardly. She's like, so tell me, Steve, have you ever had a sexual relationship with a woman? And Steve's like, no. And then she tries to flatter him because, most homosexuals look effeminate, but you don't. And actually, Steve looks incredibly effeminate. So anyway, but then she starts crying and she says, I would love nothing more than to put my arms around you and hug you and tell you that we care. And anyway, that night, somebody phoned Tammy Faye's studio and said that her son was dying of AIDS. And she had assumed that when he died, he was going to go to hell. But after watching her interview, she now knew that her son was going to go to heaven when he died of AIDS. And the same thing happened in Steve's community. It rippled out and rippled out. And so that's one reason why I called the show a miracle. But the second reason why I called it a miracle is that Steve's still alive. And he's the longest surviving person with full-blown AIDS in history. And last night, I did an event with him at Liberty Hall in Dublin. And the third miracle is that he's the most ebullient, delightful. He almost makes me believe in God.
I chose some questions to the audience in a sec. I just wanted to ask again, how do you think your work has changed? In the early days, I think there might have been a simplistic view of your work as he goes interviews oddballs and
gives them enough rope to hang themselves. I heard that loads to him the early days, which always sounded terrible to me. I'm helping people kill themselves. That's never what I wanted to do. But I would say that it was always curious. There was always curiosity and always empathy. But I think I leaned much more heavily into the curiosity, the empathy than I did when I was in my 20s. And I think the stories are much more about our world. I'm less interested in going to, extreme people on the fringes as I used to be. I'm much more interested in learning about our absurdities, what's concerning us, what's rattling around in our brains in secret. And that's really what So You've Been Publicly Shamed was about. And I think it's what my next book's going to be about as well. Much more about our world. So that's really how it's changed.
Can you tell us what the next book is about?
No.
On that, does anyone have questions for Jon?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
I just wanted to ask, with all the time you've spent with conspiracy theorists and right the way through, with no proof for the big ones, flat earthers, the 2020 election, even Alex Jones and the Sandy Hook thing, what drives these people?
It's not the nicest answer, but I do think an awful lot of it has to do with narcissistic personality disorder. I was at Alex's custody hearing and he was diagnosed with narcissistic disorder. And I think there's a very strong connection between being certainly a leader in the conspiracy movement and narcissism. One manifestation of narcissism is that you want to be the smartest person in the room. It's like you need, and sometimes the way to be the smartest person in the room is to come up with counterintuitive information that nobody else has. And because you don't have any empathy, it doesn't matter if that counterintuitive information is those children didn't die in that school shooting, so it's okay to go and hound the parents of the dead children. So that's item, like whatever the item is on the checklist, lack of empathy, and also this idea that you want to impress everybody with your special knowledge. So I think that's got an awful lot to do with it. I mean, there's lots of other reasons too, but I do think that's a big one.
Hiya, how are you doing?
Hiya.
I'm just wondering, you were talking about humour and that sort of after 9/11, my interpretation of what you're saying, so you couldn't be as humorous. I'm just wondering, say, now and 20, 25 years ago, do you use humour differently, or are you less free to use it because I suppose we're more politically correct, or there's, so the cancel culture, whatever, that people, I suppose people are more sensitive to it maybe. I just wondering what you think about that or how you use it.
Right. I have worried about, my style of writing is very much about leaving things unsaid, allowing, I always think it's like a partnership between the reader and the writer. I don't want to explain what I mean. I want And I learned there's some people like Kurt Vonnegut and Randy Newman, ambiguity, nuance, double meaning. It's really fun to play with those things when you're writing. You say something, but you don't really mean it, but the reader knows, and it's a pact, But these days, if you say something that you don't really mean, there is a danger. There's a real... and it happened to me, actually, in So You've Been Publicly Shamed. It's like the worst thing that happened. It's such a long story, I don't know if I should say it, but I did. I wrote one of those lines where I knew what I meant, and I knew that my readers would know what I meant, but a blogger from Brooklyn called Meredith didn't know what I meant. That turned bad. So it's not so much the humour, it's more that style of not over-explaining. But you know what? I'm not going to change. I don't want to over-explain. Because if you over-explain, you're treating your readers like children. So, and I love those stories where you have to, it's like solving mysteries. When you listen to a Randy Newman song, it's like solving a mystery sometimes. What does this narrator really mean? And I want that in my writing. And that's become a lot less fashionable, I'd say.
I was reading something recently about how one of the problems with how people are reading stuff online is that there's kind of two ways of reading things. I can't remember who said this, but one is a reparatory reading where you're investing good faith in the person. You're going, they mean well, they don't mean badly. And then there are paranoid readings where you read things looking for, and on Twitter sometimes I think people are looking for a reason to be annoyed.
Yeah.
And they read things with that paranoid state of mind.
And that's so the opposite of how Twitter started. Twitter was a place to be unself-conscious. You could share shameful secrets about yourself, and other people would say, oh my God, I'm exactly the same. But the way it mutated is that Twitter became a place where the hunt was on for shameful secrets. And if you've incurred Twitter's wrath, everything's going to be filtered through that. So everybody's, they're looking for the tiny decontextualized thing, to get people on. And then everybody's suddenly a linguist, you apologise, and then everybody's like parsing the apology for clues to its inauthenticity, like we're all suddenly linguists. It's like after 9/11, everyone was suddenly a structural engineer. No, that's not how buildings are supposed to fall when planes go into them. And now we're all linguists. Oh no, that sentence.
There should be a thing on
reeks
Twitter.
of inauthenticity.
You should be allowed to print off certificates. I'm a Twitter epidemiologist now.
Yeah.
Any more questions from?
Hiya. I just was thinking there whether, because I know you relocated to the States a couple of years ago, and whether in that whole context of context collapse and lack of appreciation of irony, there is a difference between the audience that you have in the States and what you'd have here.
There is. There's certain things that American audiences don't like as much as... they don't like scatological things very much. Or awkward, cringy. Like some of my stories are funny because they're so cringy. And I quickly learned that American audiences don't like that as much as European audiences do. That's the main difference that I've noticed. They want you to be authoritative, but I suppose everywhere people want non-fiction writers to be authoritative. But I sort of push back against that because I think there's like a kind of facade to the authoritative journalist who goes in, knowing everything and telling the world what to think. It's a facade. It's like a performance, and actually we're all a mass of insecurities and absurdities and so on. So I always thought, it behooved, I should point all of that stuff out too. I can be factual and reasonable and responsible while at the same time pointing out my own absurd character traits. And I think some American people, like on NPR and so on, find that a little bit uncomfortable. They would rather you one or the other. So I've noticed that a little bit.
There was another hand up here.
You just mentioned Kurt Vonnegut there and Randy Newman. What other writers influenced you?
Raymond Carver, Lynn Barber. I can't stress enough how much Nick Broomfield did. It was like, honestly, me interviewing Nick Broomfield tomorrow is like, look, I apologise if I get this biblical reference all wrong. So Saul met Jesus on the road to Damascus, right? Imagine if Saul then interviewed Jesus 20 years later at Boris House. That's how it feels. Like, honestly, I sat there watching Nick Broomfield's documentary, The Leader, His Driver and the Driver's Wife, and it was like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. So, he inspired me hugely.
I think we have time for one more question. Although I should add, I feel like I'm sold to your Jesus. Right. I'm sold to your Jesus in this scenario. But I have ripped you off so many times, John.
Hi. Well, first of all, I really enjoyed this, so thank you. I was intrigued by what you were saying about that whole experience of when you look back on you've been publicly shamed as to how you might add to it now or what you might do differently. And I guess as an appropriate ending question for this talk, when do you kind of get that sense of something is finished or you're ready to let it go?
It's such a good question. I don't really know the answer to it. Like sometimes you just have to give it up because it's driving you insane. And, you're going to have like a breakdown if you don't deliver it. When you know something... So You've Been Publicly Shamed actually wasn't finished. The hardback, it wasn't finished. It was only finished when the book came out and I could then write an afterword in the paperback to explain what happened once the book came out. Then it felt finished. So actually, I'm not great at knowing when something's finished, to be honest. But I think I'm quite good at knowing when something's beginning. Like if there's like a moment where it's like, oh my God, that's a mystery that I want to solve. That's something about the world that I don't understand. And if I do this, then I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm pretty sure whatever happens will be good. Like that's the moment that you're looking for when you're starting a project. Yeah, so I know to identify that. But I don't think I've ever come out of my office and said to my wife, right, my book's finished. Let's go for dinner. I think I usually come out of my office and say, like, everyone's going to hate this. I've lost my talent. I can't, psychopath test was a lucky fluke. But I need to get my delivery fee. That's usually how I finish my books.
Actually, Nick Cave says that you never finish a song, he just abandons it.
Right.
Unfortunately, talks like this are finished at a particular point, and this is just over now. So thanks a million to John. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you.
Thank you so much.